Are you ready for the most epic? That was epic.
Make it sound like you're talking to the microphone, not to me.
But I'm supposed to be talking to you.
20 minutes later.
No, you're supposed to be talking to...
No, that's a recording of us talking to each other.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
Okay, so on to Canada.
On to Canada, over land and lakes. On the eve of the War of 1812, America had a weak, poorly trained army and old generals. British forces were the weakest in Canada, and Americans had a poor offense strategy. They attacked in a three-pronged invasion stemming from Detroit, Niagara, and Lake Champlain. The Americans tried their luck with the Navy and fared better. They had superior gunners, thicker ship sides to protect against enemies, and larger crews. American naval officer Hazard Perry captured a British fleet on Lake Erie, and the Americans continued to beat the British from the Great Lakes. By 1814, Americans were defending their soil effectively against the British. An American fleet managed to stop British from sending supplies to an effort that would destroy New York. The invading Brits were forced to retreat, and Thomas MacDonald, is that right?
I think it's Thomas MacDonald.
Oh, MacDonald. Okay.
No, you forgot that. Thomas.
Whoever he is, he saved the Union from possible dissolution. Now, Haaris, can you explain the defeat of New Orleans?
Sure. In 1814, a second British force landed in Chesapeake Bay. The British force entered the capital and set fire to most public buildings, for example, the Capitol and the White House. However, the British couldn't capture the city. Francis Scott Key, watching the bombardment of British, was inspired to write the Star-Spangled Banner. British came a third time, aimed at New Orleans. Andrew Jackson was in command. He had 7,000 men. The overconfident British had the worst defeat in the whole war. They lost 2,000 men in only half an hour, while Americans only lost 70 men in that same amount of time. Jackson became a national hero for his victory in the Battle of New Orleans. A peace treaty had been signed in Belgium 2 weeks before the battle. The Royal Navy threw up blockades and raided Americans. American economic life was crippled. So tell me more about this treaty.
Tsar Alexander I of Russia proposed mediation between England and America. 5 American peacemakers went to Belgium. The British made high demands that the Americans flatly refused, but the news of the War of Britain's losses made them more willing to compromise. The treaty was signed on Christmas Eve 1814, and it was an armistice. Both sides agreed to stop fighting and restore conquered territory. Now, Haaris, can you tell us more about the Hartford Convention?
Oh, it was Bakwa, skip it.
What? Anyway,
the New England area prospered during the war because of illicit trade with Canadian enemies. The New England minority proposed secession from the Union. Discontent was manifested in the Hartford Convention. It was a convention at Hartford, Connecticut, where the states got together to discuss their grievances. Everybody was really sad. They demanded financial assistance from Washington to compensate for lost trade, and they also wanted to limit the presidents to 1 term. When they went to give the demands to Washington, they found that the city was burnt down and also heard the news about New Orleans. The Federalists were never again to have a successful presidential campaign.
The Second War for American Independence. The War of 1812 wasn't a global war, but it was important for America. When naval officers or people who were leaders negotiated in other countries, were treated with less scorn and were listened to. In a diplomatic sense, this was a second independence war. The new nation was solidified and brought together. Under this time, sectionalism was frowned upon. War heroes such as Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison became presidents. Manufacturing prospered, industries were stimulated because of the British blockade. This helped make America less dependent on British goods. Canadians felt betrayed by the Treaty of Ghent. They were upset that they did not even get an Indian buffer state, nor mastery of the Great Lakes. Better relations brought down border fortifications in 1870. US and Canada now share the world's largest unfortified border of 5,527 miles. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, Americans turned their back on the old world and focused on building up their nation. America emerged as one nation after the 1812 war. Congress revived the Bank of the United States and rebuilt the Capitol. The Army was expanded and the Navy won more battles.
The American system. The Americans took pride in their mushrooming factories. What's mushrooming?
It's like randomly growing out of nowhere, like mushrooms in your backyard.
Oh, that's what mushrooming means. I thought they were making mushrooms in factories.
What?
Like you know how in Kroger they have the mushrooms packaged?
Yeah.
Henry Clay launched a plan called the American System, and it consisted of a strong banking system with easy credit, a network of roads and canals to help move things. This helped the country become closer economically and politically. So Hamudi, what was the so-called era of good feelings?
Let me start with James Monroe. He was nominated in 1816 and he won with 183 to 34 votes. The Federalist Party was dying out. He straddled two generations, the Founding Fathers and the New Nationalism. He was the least distinguished of the first 8 presidents. He took a tour of the United States and people liked him. This ushered in the era of good feelings, but it was only nice for the first couple of years. Conflicts and disagreements were about to begin. So Haaris, what were these conflicts?
Well, they were known as the Panic of 1819 and the Curse of Hard Times. Economic panic started because of over-speculation in the frontier lands, followed by deflation, depression, bankruptcy, and unemployment. This ended the goodness of the feelings. The Panic of 1819 created trouble in the political and social world. People were imprisoned for debt, mothers were taken from their children for owing just a few dollars. So the nation was up to 22 states. The Ohio fever had people moving and expanding westward. Eager newcomers were beginning to stream in impressive numbers. Bad soil exhausted from tobacco, economic distress during the embargo years, and the crushing of Indians opened the frontier and drove people westward. The steamboat also helped people with upstream navigation. The West, however, was still weak in population and independence. The Land Act of 1820 made people buy 80 acres at once and at a minimum of $1.25 per acre.
Slavery and the sectional balance.
How is this epic or funny at all? Well, we have some bloopers.
We have some, yeah, we'll
But it's not
include it in the
epic,
middle.
because you have to put the gunners.
Yeah, okay.
Several bad puns later.
Rivalry between the North and South over who would control the West revealed itself in 1819. The House of Representatives passed the Talmadge Amendment, which meant that no more slaves should be brought into Missouri. It also granted gradual emancipation of the slave children. There was much anger from the Southerners.
Much anger.
Moral questions about the evils of slavery were popping up.
Very evil.
This led up to the uneasy Missouri Compromise.
Yeah, so Congress agreed to admit Missouri as a slave state, but at the same time to separate part of Massachusetts and add Maine as a state. Missouri could keep their slaves, but no more were permitted in the rest of the Louisiana Purchase. Both the North and the South seceded and gained something. How did they secede and gain something? Yeah, the North got more slaves, and the South got Missouri as a slave state.
So how long did this compromise last?
It lasted a whole 34 years. Okay, Google, define.
On wall or embankment built to prevent flooding from the sea.
Sharing Oregon and acquiring Florida. Nationalism helped shape the foreign policy. Anglo-American Convention of 1818 was talked over with Britain. Americans and Canadians had a 10-year joint occupation of Oregon country. Americans thought that Florida should be part of the United States. Revolutions broke out in South America, and Americans cheered, but Spain sent special troops to squash the rebellion. General Jackson saw an opportunity to take the swampland by saying that hostile and fugitive slaves were there and he had to go get them back. Jackson killed people and captured Florida, exceeding Washington's instructions in the process.
He obviously killed people to capture Florida.
Well, we had to say it. Okay. All of Monroe's cabinet wanted to punish Jackson, except for John Quincy Adams. In the Florida Purchase Treaty, the U.S. got Spanish Florida and some of Oregon in exchange for giving Texas to the Spaniards.
The menace of monarchy in America. Europe did not like democracy. They feared it for what they had seen in the French Revolution. The Crown of England stopped rebellions in Italy and Spain, and wanted to stop them in South America too. The Americans were alarmed. They felt that if the Europeans intervened in the New World, republicanism would be harmed. Abe, Monroe ke bare mein batao.
Secretary Adams was wary of Britain wanting an alliance and thought that they were just doing it to keep Americans from expanding. Monroe's doctrine in 1823 was a stern warning to European powers with two basic features. Number one, non-colonization, and number two, non-intervention.
I should borrow the Ahmad here. Could have done something funny.
I have his number.
Oh, I do have it. That guy was sleeping.
Except-
Boom! Wake up.
Lastly, Haaris, can you talk about the appraisal of Monroe's doctrine?
Okay, chalo, let's do this. The monarchs of Europe were enraged. You should be engaged. The monarchs of Europe were enraged, but they couldn't do much about it. The Latin nations didn't really take notice, and the treaty wasn't significant and was forgotten about for a while. The doctrine was more of a self-defense policy. It was never actually a law, agreement, or a pledge. Just a statement of policy Monroe had said, and presidents over time have changed it.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, comment.
Let's just not even give us 100. Let's see how many mega minutes we have. We have 54 minutes and 2 hours. 2 hours and 54 minutes.
Wait.